I am the executive director of the Trauma Resource Institute and one of the key developers of the community resiliency model. Today, I'm going to go through the key elements of the community resiliency model with you. I'm going to start out by talking about what I call the elegant design, the capacity to heal. And that's what I've seen as I've gone all over the world, bringing this model to different communities, whether rural, city, from different continents, that I've seen that the human body has the inner capacity to heal and restore itself and has a wisdom that words cannot speak. In 2006, along with two other women, Jeannie Everett and Lori Leach, we started the Trauma Resource Institute, a nonprofit corporation. Since then, the other two ladies have gone on to do different things in their life, and I was made the sole director in 2012. So our vision is to create trauma-informed and resiliency-informed individuals and communities. And our mission is a commitment to bring wellness skills based on cutting-edge neuroscience to our world community, one person at a time, one community at a time. A community at a time. You know, since we started in 2006, I have to say that I've had the fortune to go to many places. We were in Haiti, we've been to Nepal, we've done work in Africa where we've trained people from Rwanda, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania. We've been to China. We've had people who are trained in our model, train people in Sierra Leone, in Japan. We've been to Guatemala, we've been to Mexico. We've been in many places in the United States, including other places in Europe, in Germany, in England, and in Northern Ireland. And also our Loma Linda team went to Serbia. So I'd like to say that we've seen that we're all designed in a very similar way. We may have different visions of why we have the symptoms we have after highly stressful events or after traumatic events. But in essence, whether we live where I live in California or in England or Africa or the different places that we've been, that the human experience is very similar after a traumatic experience or a highly stressful event. So the goals of the community resiliency model, and I like to say that the community resiliency model is affordable, portable, adaptable, and accessible. First of all, it's on an individual basis. We want to help people widen their state of well-being, which we call the resilient zone. We want to help to reset the nervous system to bring it back into balance after stressful and traumatic events. And we want to intercept the hijacking of the nervous system by learning skills for self-care. And also, one of the things that we learn is the most important thing is people want to feel better in their life. So we want to help people learn how they can integrate these very simple skills into their activities of daily living. The second thing that another key component of the community resiliency model, why it has community in it, is we really want to create a cadre of CRM-informed community members who are educated not only in the biology of traumatic stress reactions, but most importantly, the biology of resilience, and that how we are designed to restore well-being, even after difficult things have happened to us in our life. So we want to help the communities understand by widening the resilient zone in individuals, that it also has the effect of moving out to the wider community, not only to your own family, but to the community that you live in. So one of the other things that we've learned is it's just that I do a lot of traveling. So I'm on planes a lot, and the flight attendants always say, if there is an incident, put your own oxygen mask on first, because if you don't have that on first, you can't help the people around you. And that's how we view the resiliency skills. Many of us live in very difficult situations, and we're trying to juggle and live through challenging life circumstances. And what we found is when people can put on that resiliency mask for themselves first, and the resiliency mask, what that means is learning the skills and for yourself so that you can be in the best part of yourself as you go through your life. And if you're doing that, you're also modeling it, not only to your family members, if you have children, to your children, but also to the wider community. People ask us, well, who can CRM help? Well, first of all, it can help almost anyone. And if you look at this picture on our slide presentation, if I could have put the world in here, I probably should have. But there are people of different races, people who identify as straight or trans, or lesbian or gay. There are police officers. There are people who work in different sorts of ways in our community where they're really frontline workers working with traumas as they happen, but we really find that we can really help almost anyone. It is challenging for some people to learn the skills if they can't sense their body. And if that happens, though, there's other ways that we can help them at least learn about the education of what may have happened to them, why they can't sense their body, so that there's a starting point. Now, the interventions are very easy to learn. And basically there's a set of 6 wellness skills taught to members of the community that bring the body and mind back into balance. And there's a few key elements that we've learned. First of all, many times when we've had stressful and traumatic events, people press us to talk about that event. And for some of us, it's helpful. But for others of us, it isn't, because every time we talk about it, we feel like it's happening again. And it doesn't feel good inside of our body, and it affects the way we think and the way we feel. So you can learn these wellness skills that have to do with the biology of the human nervous system, and you don't ever have to talk about whatever happened to you if you don't want to. We've also learned that people can learn these simple skills, whether they can read or write, which of course is important for little ones, but also important for people that live in communities that may not have the same advantages to education. And also, we already said, we've seen it work with different cultures and ethnic backgrounds, but also different ages. And I always like to tell the story of my father-in-law, who's 103, and one day he was feeling pretty bad about his knees that caused him a lot of trouble. And I said to him, "Oh my goodness, Kenny, I'm so sorry your knees are bothering you again." And he said, "Well, but my arms feel pretty strong." I said, "You've got strong arms." And so he started paying attention to his arms, and he started moving his arms back and forth, almost like he was lifting weights. And then he said, "I think my arms are stronger than yours." I said, "I think you're right, because I don't push the walker around all day long like you do." And so you could just see him kind of restore himself, laugh a little bit. And of course his knees, they're going to remain something that hurts him throughout the remainder of his life, however long it is. And he's been lucky enough to live to 103. But the point of it is that when we bring attention to the present moment and what else is true, that it really can shift the way we experience our body and also how we view ourselves in the world. And this even can be helpful for someone who is as old as he is. So we've also developed educational materials over the years. We have wristbands, we have an app, we have resiliency pens, and we also have a website called ichillapp.com, where you can listen to the model and learn the skills on your own time and re-listen to them, because the app is also available for smartphones. So let's go right into the key concepts. And I want to give you what my definition first is of resiliency. Resiliency has become a very widely used word. And if you put the word resiliency, for example, in Google, you would come up with literally hundreds of definitions. So what we mean about resiliency, it's an individual and community's ability to identify and use their individual and collective strengths in living fully in the present moment and to thrive while managing the activities of daily living. We've also seen that, it's really a person's ability to use skills throughout their day to manage all the challenges they encounter. And as we look at the key concepts, people often ask me, what is this based upon? Well, first of all, there's laws of nature. Wherever you live in the world, you have stormy days, you have sunshine days. Some of us live in climates where there's more rain. I live in Southern California, which we could use more rain. But those laws of nature that exist outside of the doorways of our dwellings also exist within our nervous system. So there are days that I've had stormy things happening inside of myself, and days that I felt well. But what we've learned about the laws of nature, that if we pay attention to them, that there is the elegant design of the nervous system, and that we can expand our well-being by paying attention to our sensations of well-being. So one of the things that we learn about is the autonomic nervous system, and that is inherent in everyone around the world, and it's what is keeping us going. We call it, it takes action, and it also puts the brake on. So if you were to get out of your chair right now and move quickly in space, and move your arms and your legs rapidly, your heart rate would go up. That's the sympathetic or the accelerator of your nervous system. And then once you stopped and you sat down back in your chair, your nervous system would quiet for most of us, and it would come back, and that would be the parasympathetic nervous system. We might take a deeper breath, feel our muscles relaxing. So in the model, we teach people how to read their nervous system so that it's more, so that they can be in charge of the parts that they can be in charge of, because also it's called automatic. So some of the things happen without thinking, but we have learned that with intention, you can slow your nervous system down, and you can bring attention to places inside that are about your well-being that helps you feel better in mind, body, and spirit. The other thing that this is based on is the neuroscience, the study of the brain. And there has been a burgeoning area of knowledge in the last 25 years. And people call this an application of all this amazing brain science that's been done in our major academic centers, and how we can translate it simply to those of us that aren't neuroscientists. So I hope that you'll be able to see as you go through the skills that they're pretty simple, and even a small child can learn them. I mean, I also like to say at this time too that I've been very influenced by the work of people who've been pioneers in what we call biological-based therapies. Other people call somatic, such as Peter Levine and Pat Ogden, and people who have spent a good deal of their professional career in bringing forth the idea that we need to pay attention to our bodies. I was also, early in my days, trained as a doula and a childbirth educator. And one of the things that I think you'll notice about the model is that there's a gentle nature to it. Because what I learned during those days was that we could be going through a very painful experience, yet if a person was with us, guiding us and helping us, it really would help us stay present to the present moment and guide us through what could be a very painful experience. So I hope that you'll see the gentleness of the model. So our primary focus is biology versus mental weakness. And what we mean about that is, if you see the picture here, there's a picture of the human body, and it shows you different organs and different systems in the body. And what we've seen as we've gone around the world is that there are common human reactions after a stressful or traumatic event that affect the mind, body, and spirit. But people often don't realize that their gut problems, or the fact that sometimes they feel tight muscles, or their heart rate sometimes beats really fast on cloudy days, if they've been a person who's lived, let's say, in a hurricane country, that the body has a reaction that's based on our survival. So we try to help people learn about the biology of the human nervous system and how it can be another portal, another doorway to help us. Because, there's a lot of us that aren't necessarily psychologically oriented, so we wouldn't be necessarily keen on going to see a therapist, yet we want to feel better. And that's not to say that therapy can be very helpful for people. But this is not therapy. This is about learning wellness skills that can help restore your nervous system into balance. So here's a little graphic of the autonomic nervous system that I mentioned earlier. And you can see here with the arrows that when we're in the sympathetic, the accelerator, preparing for action, all the different parts of our nervous system that gets amplified. And also parts that we don't need, like the digestion and saliva, because if we're in preparing for action, let's say if there was a tiger walking into the room, we would need our arms and our legs to have all the blood flow go to there so we could get away from that predator. So we wouldn't need to be digesting our food at that point. And so, but we want to also, the system, when one is up, the other hopefully is down, that when there's no longer the threat, that we take the deeper breath, our heart rate goes down, our blood pressure comes down, we're not sweating as much, and then our digestion and saliva comes back online. If we continue to look at some of the neuroscience, one of the exciting things we've learned is that the brain can change, that there is hope. So you can see the two photos on the bottom of the screen. One looks pretty arid and the other is pretty lush. And so I guess what we learned is that you can learn new pathways to manage your life that give you more support so that you can manage the things that happen to you. So the brain can change, and that's one of the most important things that I certainly have learned from neuroscience in the last few years. So we have the inner balance, this inner ability to bring our nervous system into a state of balance, I've seen everywhere. And I just want to say, as we move into the next section, it's amazingly human that we can do this. So going into key concepts 2. we're going to talk a little bit about the resilient zone. And there's many people around the world that talk about, this resilient zone in different ways. In some, like in Spanish, it's called la zona de bienestar. Some people call it the zone of well-being. And we've really actually decided for kids, we call it the okay zone. Because when you're in the resilient zone, you're able to handle the stresses of life. Notice that it's not a straight line. It's curvy. So there's a charge, there's a release during the day, and we can even be a little angry or annoyed in the resilient zone, or we can even be sad, but it doesn't bump us out. We're still able to manage the sadness or grief that we're having depending on our life circumstances, or even when we're getting a bit upset. And with children, we can be okay sad and okay mad, but still within our zone. But what often happens is that for all of us throughout the world, we have something that we call the high zone or the low zone. And essentially what that means is that sometimes we're not in that resilient zone, and there's things in our life that bump us out. And so we may get angry and we say things we don't mean if we're in the high zone, or in the low zone. Maybe we feel sad, disconnected, we're exhausted, maybe even feel pain in our body. Or numbness, which can happen either the high zone or the low zone. But the problem with the high zone and the low zone is not that they necessarily happen, is whether we get stuck there. And if we get stuck there, it certainly can derail our life. This is another picture which shows emojis that we like to show to children, because this also helps us have this vista of what it may be like in the high or the low zone. But it's a biological process, and I think that's what we want to underscore. And there's many people who've talked about this biological process, including Bruce Perry, who's done a lot of study on children, Stephen Porges, Bessel van der Kolk, many people, that after a traumatic or highly stressful event, some individuals will always be afraid, even if there's no current threat. Even a small little stress can cause a person to be afraid, and they don't know why. And so if they get stuck in that high zone or low zone, that can happen to some of us depending on our life experience. And some people go back and forth. They can only be stuck in the high zone so long before they crash into the low zone. And when we're in that state, and this is really important when we're thinking about not only the adults but children in our life, who sadly, many are growing up with many challenging things in their life, that they may have difficulty concentrating when they're in that state, because being in the high zone is really meant for action, because you feel that you're being threatened, and being in the low zone disconnects us, and we still may not be able to pay attention, because the parts of our brain that are available to us for learning may be diminished. So here's another little graphic that we put together that gives you an idea of what it might be like for different bandwidths of your resilient zone, because not all of us have the same bandwidth, and depending on our life circumstances, even myself, who I feel I have a pretty ample resilient zone, sometimes there may be stresses that happen that may reduce the width of my resilient zone. But wherever you are, in terms of a wide or more shallow width, it's really important to know that you can expand the width of your resilient zone. So when you're in your resilient zone, it matters. And one of the reasons why it matters, there's many reasons why it matters, but it's something called mirror neurons, because we as human beings are hardwired for empathy. So there's a part of our brain that if we see someone who's in pain, that we actually experience the pain inside of us as well. So there is a researcher at UC San Diego named Dr. Ramachandran, who, to quote him, he says, "If I empathize with your pain, I need to experience it myself." That's what mirror neurons are doing, allowing me to empathize with your pain. This is the basis of all empathy. And I would even go a step further. This is about the human condition. This is about keeping people that we love in our friendship network, our community, alive, because if we see them in pain, then hopefully we will take action. Now, one of the things that happens with many of us that have worked with people that are suffering, that because we see so much of it and we witness it and we listen to it, we can start experience what some people call vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, where we can start feeling the symptoms even though we haven't gone through the experience. But if we start investing in our well-being, even if we're working in very difficult situations, we can restore ourselves as well. So, but it's very, very important that when you are in your resilient zone, and if you can by intention bring yourself there, even when dealing with something very difficult, that also has the effect of impacting people around us. You may know, like, let's say when you're feeling sad or troubled, maybe there's a special friend or somebody you work with that they're the go-to person. And why do we do that? Maybe because after we talk to them, we feel better. So those mirror neurons, and you can see in the picture on the top, is like they're happening between the two individuals. And that's also providing greater support and also changing your physical experience, that also changes the way you feel and what you may think. So these are some of the common reactions going into the next section. There can be emotional, physical, relational, thinking, behavior, and spiritual reactions that are quite common that we've seen all over the world. And I'm going to go to this next page where we have put together some of the things that we've seen all over the world in thinking, physical, emotional, behavioral, relationships, and spiritual. Just take a moment to look at the list. I'm not going to read everything out loud, but I want you to know that I've asked the same questions in so many different places in the world, and the same list comes up every single time, whether someone lives in Nepal, whether in Haiti, in Africa, in the US, in Europe, in UK. So, my response to that are these are common reactions. I think sometimes in the West, in order to study things, we put things in category and made things disorders, but I don't know necessarily if I would call it a disorder. I would call them common reactions. Doesn't mean that we don't need help for some of the side effects for it, but this is another way in the model that we move people from the idea that there's something wrong with you. I'd say, well, you've probably had extraordinary events or hard things that have happened to you, but you've had common reactions to them. The other thing that we talk about in the model is, when we talk about this portal of healing, that we've learned as we work with the nervous system, that you may have some of those symptoms that we just talked about, but they can't be talked away. It's like if you're anxious, like stop being anxious. Well, that may be an easier thing to say, but it doesn't, those words don't respond or don't connect to the part of your body and your brain that have to do with anxiety, but it can be sensed away. So for example, if I was feeling a lot of anxiety, I might put my hands on the table in front of me and feel the coolness of the table. And as I did that, I just took a deeper breath. I might then all of a sudden notice I took a deeper breath. Or I might also shift my awareness to things in my life that are peaceful or give me joy or peace. And that may also help me come back into a place where I'm feeling better. So we're trying to really move people away from the idea, if these are common reactions, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It just means that you're human. And that can be tremendously experienced as a relief for many people. And that moves us into the next area, which is post-traumatic growth. And these are the positive, it can be actually psychological, spiritual changes experienced as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life situations. So just for a moment, what are some of the ways that you or people maybe that you work with or people that you know have experienced growth after a highly stressful or traumatic event? So just take a second to think about it. And I'll go to the next slide, because these are just some of the words that we've heard from people. Increased resilience and internal strength, gratitude, stronger advocate, forgiveness, appreciation for loved ones, increased faith, wisdom, clearer priorities, compassion for self and others. There's many more, and you might have more to add to this list, but this seems to be also part of the human condition, that even as difficult and tragic things happen to us, that many people in time seem to be able to look at what happened to them. And even, I've worked with, people that have lost children who have created nonprofits in the name of their children that are doing something in the name of their children that will, live not only during their lifetimes, but long after they pass. So these are the kinds of things also that can be very sustainable and help people move forward after these kinds of things happen. So let's get now into the CRM skills, and I want to bring to you what they're called. So the fundamental one is tracking. which we use with all the other skills. And tracking just simply means reading the nervous system. We have something that we call resourcing, which we would say is paying attention to your internal and external resources. We have grounding, which many different kinds of skills of well-being incorporate. We also have something called Help Now and gesturing and shift and stay, which we'll explain them as we go through the chapters, the sections. So let's get into tracking and reading the nervous system. And you notice that the pictures have to do with a garden. There's a very lush garden, and there are some weeds. I actually look, some of those weeds can actually look pretty. Those are dandelions. But when I put these two pictures here, it was for a very specific reason. Is that, do you have gardens in the part of the world that you live in? Most places on earth have gardens somewhere, someplace. And you might plant fruits and vegetables and flowers in your garden. And you have to water your garden in order for the garden to grow. Now, in most gardens around the world, and you'll probably know this, that you probably have some weeds in your garden. And even though we know that there's weeds that have some medicinal qualities, if you only decided to water the weeds in your garden, what would happen to your garden? Well, the response to that I've heard many places is that the weeds would grow. And what would happen to your fruits and vegetables and your flowers if you didn't water them is they would most likely wither and die. So what we're trying to, using this metaphor is that I really want to encourage all of you to start tracking the well-being, which in the metaphor are the fruits and vegetables and the flowers of your garden. And even though we know the weeds are there, and we may even say those weeds are important to be there, we don't want to forget that they're there. Who do we want leading our lives? The riches and the structures of resources and goodness in our life, or the things that have brought us down? And that would be, something that each one of you would have to answer. But I want to really clearly state here, it doesn't mean I'm saying to forget about what's happened to us. It means that how do you want to go forward in living, and what do you want to pay attention to? So this is the most important thing about the community resiliency model: to learn to read your nervous system so that you can tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being. Because when you're able to do that and you sense a certain sensation, then you have choice. And then in terms of what you pay attention to on the inside, and to expand and grow your well-being. So developing the language of sensation has a big payoff for you. And this was a study that was done in Finland. And I'm going to say Dr. Lori, because I can't pronounce her last name. But what I loved about this particular study is that when people experience different emotions, that there was a corresponding sensation in their body. Now, how she reported this information is that people were asked to color on just an image of a human body, yellow with increased sensation, and also a darkened or blue color in less sensation. And so by doing this, if you look at the bottom love, look at all the light that was colored in the body when people experience love. So the thing, when I saw this, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what we've been talking about for years now. First of all, sensations originate in billions of receptors distributed in every part of your body, but that life experience, including our thoughts, our feelings, have a corresponding sensation within the body. How many of us have had feelings that no matter how we tried, we just couldn't get rid of them. But if we use the body as a portal and sense our well-being, it actually can shift the way we think and the way we feel. And hopefully by starting to use the wellness skills, you'll be able to start to see that. So here's our autonomic nervous system again. We've already talked about it, so I'll just go through that. But the other thing about the autonomic nervous system is that there's a biological process that when we start feeling better, we take a deeper breath. Sometimes there's also something else that you'll experience. You might experience trembling, tingling, yawning. Your stomach may start to gurgle, even a burp, a sense of warmth that is a sense of well-being, and also a cooling down that feels good in the body. So these are called release sensations. And they're part of what happens to the nervous system when the nervous system is coming back into a more balanced state. So some people, for instance, like, let's say they were in a car accident and afterwards they start to shake their body. Well, the shaking is very important. So we wouldn't want to stop that shaking. We say, just let it shake out. And we even have phrases in our language, in the English language, we say, someone might say, well, just shake it out. Well, that's because we've learned from observations from years and years and years, hundreds of years, that shaking it out afterwards, there is a release, a deeper breath, and we feel better. So when we're learning about sensations, it's important to learn about sensation words, because those are different than feeling words. And if you can see this little chart that I put together, there's vibration, size, temperature, pain, muscles. And as you look at them, you'll see that there's different words that describe it. So right now, as wherever you are, I'm going to invite you just to move your hands together really fast, fast, and then to stop. Now, when you were rubbing them fast, was the temperature of your hands, were they cold, hot? Like mine were hot. And as I've stopped, my hands are now warmer, but they actually are not they're a little bit warmer than when I started. So that's me tracking the temperature in my body just through doing a very simple exercise like that. So for example, if I was having an argument with, let's say, my partner, who's a very good person, but I was really upset, I might feel something different inside my body. Maybe I'd feel tightness in my muscles. Maybe I'd even feel like a little something in my belly that might feel hard. And maybe my breathing would get faster, a little bit more rapid. And maybe I'd even feel a little bit of shaking because I was so upset. So those are sensations and those are distress. So let's say that that's what I was experiencing. I might say to myself, oh, this doesn't feel very good. But it's also giving me information about my state that maybe there's something I need to take care of. But I also have learned that if I stay in a more high zone state with my husband, it doesn't necessarily involve us coming to a better solution for whatever challenge we're learning. So if I know that distressing sensation is there, I might, by intention, again, activate one of the skills so that I can get back into my resilient zone, so that we can have a different kind of conversation. So here we have a little graph of sensations that can be connected to stress and trauma, resiliency, and release. And you'll see there's some of the things what I've talked about already, but this just will give you some guideposts of maybe what to notice as you start tracking your own nervous system. And remember, this is not a model for every single person. Some people don't want to pay attention to their body. It just makes them uncomfortable. And if this is too difficult, you can stop. But I'm really hoping that you might want to go further and at least learn a little bit more about the model, because it may be an important thing for you in your life to learn about these sensations and being able to discern what's distressful, what's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So how do we track? We turn on our nervous system by paying attention to what's happening on the inside. Like right now, I'm sitting here, my heart rate is pretty steady. My breathing rate is normal. When I haven't just said breath, I took a deeper breath. My muscles are pretty relaxed right now. And so I would say right now I'm in my zone. And if I was saying, oh, I wanted to share this with someone I just met, I might ask them, as they're thinking about something that brings them joy or peace, to notice what happens on the inside, which may be making them feel pleasant, or even neutral, because neutral can be also a very nice sensation if we've been used to a lot of distress inside of our body. And then finally, there's a third way. It's almost like the internal climate that you have. It's like your own GPS system that you may notice, God, I feel sleepy right now, gosh, or I feel clear and focused, or I feel sad or happy. So sometimes what we're feeling is not necessarily our own state, but the person across the room from us that we're talking to, because of those mirror neurons that we talked about earlier. But that can be also, when you're tracking your own GPS system, that may also give you an indicator of when you need to reach out to help someone. So when we are a person who tracks another person, we call that person a CRM guide. A CRM guide is a person who helps another person become more aware of the sensations inside. And we encourage that increased awareness to pleasant or neutral sensations. We also don't, it's not directive. So we don't say, I want you to experience this. We'll say, well, I'm wondering, when you think about that beautiful scene in nature where you used to go when you were a kid and used to go fishing with your grandpa, what are you aware of happening on the inside as you just call that to mind right now? So that would be an open-ended question. And we wouldn't say, oh, what do you notice right at this moment in your sensations? That would be too fast. So we'd just kind of be present and we'd say, gee, as you're just calling that to mind right now, I've almost even noticed you have a big smile on your face. And the person may even say, oh yeah, I feel more relaxed. And so we might say, well, we've just been learning that it's really important to pay attention to where inside you feel a greater state of relaxation. And we're not judgmental about, sensations just exist. They're not right or wrong. We all can get stuck in our high zone or low zone, or and also find our okay zone or our resilient zone. So we just try to be present to whatever someone might be experiencing. So we're not directing or assuming that what one is feeling or experiencing. And that's been an important learning for me, because sometimes I would say, oh, I think that person is sad or they're happy. And they'll say, well, are you? And they'll say, well, no, I'm not necessarily happy or sad. I just feel okay. So again, bringing our attention to what is true in that way by asking open-ended questions. So, you may have something, you may want to pause for a second if you have, let's say, a piece of candy or a piece of fruit or something to eat in your house, if that's possible. But I'm going to take you through this, give you a moment to find something in your home and or wherever you are. And as you're finding this piece of fruit or raisin candy, you can also put the this recording on pause while you go and find it. But you can hold the item in your hand and say, what's the weight? Is it light? Is it heavy? As you hold the item, is it rough if you touch it, or smooth or scratchy? As you look at it, what do you notice? I mean, it's something maybe you want to eat. You might even notice salivation. And then what would happen if you take it, and not to eat it yet, but you just smell it? And what happens? Is it sweet smell? Is it stinky? And then I would invite you to bite it and see, is it juicy, tasty, sweet, sour? And then take a bite. And then what happens as you take the bite on the inside? Is this a piece of something to eat that is pleasant or unpleasant to you? Is it neutral? So this is one way that we can develop sensory language. So the next skill is called resourcing. But the reason why we develop resources is we want to track our neutral or pleasant sensations, because to quote Carla Schatz from Harvard, brain cells that fire together wire together. And you can see this is a picture of a brain cell. And this means what you pay attention to grows, just like our garden metaphor. And there's even something that people say, if you don't use it, you lose it. So that is, we want to create new pathways. And if there's pathways inside that are about our distress, if we start paying attention to something else and building these pathways of well-being, they will grow. And that may actually be able to override some of those patterns that we may have of distress inside of our nervous system. And that's one of the ways that people start to change. So resources can be external, internal, or imagined. They can really be anything. They can be people, places, activities, skills, hobbies, spiritual guides, animals, anything that gives you joy, peace, or calm. It's really important that resource doesn't need to be something that makes you calm. It can be something like, I love roller coasters, but when I think about the roller coaster, my heart starts beating a little fast. Can you see in my face kind of light up? I can kind of feel more energy into my system, but that's my state of well-being. Internal resources can be, let's say that you're a kind person, or that you have compassion or humor. And as you think about your compassion, your humor, your kindness, is to pay attention to what happens on the inside. Or I've had people say, well, I've got really strong legs, or I have amazing body because I've healed from so many illnesses. And even though my body distresses me, it's really an amazing instrument of well-being as well. So I'll go, wow, as you tell me that, what do you notice on the inside? And you see that big breath, and a person will have this, sometimes I'll go like this and have this incredible sense of openness. But for some of us, it's harder to identify external or internal resources. So it's really important for you, if you're one of those individuals, to know that you can imagine a resource. Like I have a friend, she loves George Clooney. He's married now, has 2 kids. Doesn't change the fact that, she thinks about him. And there's just something about his presence and how he conveys himself as not only an actor and a humanitarian that brings her a state of well-being, even though she doesn't have an actual physical present relationship with him. She's never met him. So that sort of thing you might think of as a character in a book or a TV show or a superhero. And by thinking of that, what happens on the inside. And this just gives you some other things to think about, what children sometimes might say as they're thinking about resourcing. So we know that resourcing can really build this sense of internal strength. And what we've seen is people start paying attention to the sensations of well-being, that they can start being, wow, I didn't realize I had all those resources. It's like, boy, I'm catching a larger net around me, tossing it and really bringing in all my resources. And that really can restore hope and bring a new sense of that hope that we talked about earlier. When we talk about a resource, and let's say you're listening to this and say, okay, what is my resource? And let's say, I'm going to give you an example of one of mine. I have a granddaughter. Her name is Madison. So I can just tell you that Madison is just one of the joys of my life. But if I just say the word, it's like it does make me feel better, but it may actually make me even feel better if I say, well, what do I love about her? Oh my gosh, she has such a little spirit. She's very curious. She's a fast little runner. She's the sweetest smile. Oh my gosh, I just love to have her on my lap and when she wants to cuddle with me. And as I'm saying it, are you noticing anything? I feel even a gentleness come into my system. But I'm expanding the resource, not just saying her name, but thinking about additional things that fill in a larger image of her. So if I was painting a picture, it's like I'm painting all these different images of myself with Madison. And as I do that, I can notice a greater sense of well-being inside. And we've also learned from, like Rick Hansen in his book, The Buddha Brain, talks about the paying attention for 14 seconds. In different research, it's different, between 14 to 20 seconds to pay attention to something that actually starts to shift the nervous system. So when we think about the resource and spend that 14 to 20 seconds expanding it, then it can bring this greater sense of awareness, of the sense of well-being. So before we do a little exercise with resources, I want to just say one thing before we do it, and that is, as much as a resource can also evoke an experience of well-being inside of our nervous system, if I was to tell you about my grandmother, who I really loved, who was really one of the driving forces of well-being in my life, she died about 10 years ago. And so I can get sad thinking about her. And so I can even feel it. I don't know if you can see even my eyes right now, a little sadness will come over me. But that doesn't mean that she's still not a resource. So if that would happen, which I can feel it a little bit right now, I might say, what did I love about her? She used to make pancakes that looked like Mickey Mouse. She used to let me make lemonade. We would go in the backyard of her house where she had apple trees and lemon trees, and we'd pick lemons. And we had those old-fashioned lemon juicers, and we would twist the lemons together, and then we would make the sweetest lemonade with lots of sugar, and then I would sell it in front of her house. So as I said more about her, I could feel the well-being about my relationship, as if she's even with me, even though she's now passed. So that's what I say about the many natures of a resource. Sometimes even tears would come. And all I would say, if that happens to you as you call up a resource, is to pay attention to the tears, to have a sense of them. Because as we sense them, it actually can make it more embodied, that we actually can carry the fact that she's also a resource with me, as well as there's a sadness because she's not here. So just know that that can also be an element of creating resources. So what I'd like you to do now, and invite you to do, is to write down 3 resources, to circle one, and to write down 3 or more details about your resource. And then read your resource and the 3 details about your resource to yourself. And as you read about the resource, notice what happens on the inside. And if there is someone after you finish the exercise that you might want to share this with, I really invite you to, maybe call a friend, or if there's someone in your dwelling that you might be able to share your resource with. Okay. So I'm going to pause now and give you a few minutes to do that.